Good evening, everyone, from a very snowy Dunroven Ranch, Montana. Happy New Year. 2015 is going to be a great year. I'm delighted to have Judy Blunt with us again today. As you all know, we have been reading her book, Breaking Clean. Judy is on my left. My husband, Sterling, joined in because he read the book, loved the book, and he would like to participate as well. He is on my right. And though you can't see her, Diane Hoffman from Princeton, New Jersey, is with us on the phone. Can you say hello, Diane?
I'm waving.
You're waving. We'll wave back, okay? We can wave back.
The Queen's wave.
Yeah. Well, welcome, everybody, and let's get the discussion off and rolling. The last 2 Wednesdays, actually the middle of December, and then just this last Wednesday, Diane held some chat sessions on our website in which people talked about Judy's book, and she summarized those discussions in a series of questions. And I think I'd like to start with those questions. Judy, if you don't mind, Diane, I'll have you just start off, but before we do exactly that, I'd like to say everybody that I talked to, both during the chat sessions and just casually on chat, really enjoyed the book a great deal.
Thank you.
And I had people telling me they learned a lot of new language. Well, Eastern Montana language. You really brought it alive for everybody. So, Diane, with that, let's go to the questions that you accumulated from the chat room.
You surprised me. I have to go find my questions, except that I can remember my first one, because I was wondering, and that first question was actually mine, whether you kept journals throughout your life, and was this book written from the journals you kept, or was a lot of this written from remembered memory? In other words, how much was actual fact that you actually kept track of and the other remembered memory?
I did not keep journals. I have written journals off and on throughout my life. They've never done more than be the sort of therapeutic writings that one does when no one else is listening. So most of this, with the exception of, say, the salvage essay, the chapter in the middle about the blizzard of 64 and 5, that particular one, I traveled out to Eastern Montana and I interviewed my father. I put my journalism degree to work for that chapter by interviewing people because I remembered that particular blizzard as a 10-year-old. And you know, a 10-year-old remembers 10-year-old things, and I wanted a larger picture of what that meant to the region and to the people that suffered through it. The rest of it pretty much is memory, and people will ask me all the time, how did you remember so clearly? And the clearest answer that I can give is to say that I grew up in an area and in a time when there was you got no praise for being a child. You got a praise for acting like an adult. So from earliest memory, we played at being grown up. And then when we could, we stepped in and made a hand, as my father would say. And so that means that you observe closely. You observe what the adults are doing. You don't ask a lot of questions because they don't suffer fools well. And it's a matter of being incredibly observant. And that's how I made my way through young childhood, and then that was reinforced when I moved at age 13 to Malta to attend high school. I had to observe my peer group and how to live in town, how to make my way in the world alone. And that was done through observation and then trying to mimic the behavior of people my own age, I guess. Again, that was replicated when I moved to Missoula. With my 3 children, I had to learn how to drive in a town with stoplights. I had to be brave and strong for them. And that meant that I spent a lot of time watching and observing and then stepping in and trying to make a hand. So that's about the best I can come to why it is that I remember the way I do.
Diane, do you have your questions in front of you now? Because if you don't, I do.
I do.
Oh, good. It's a good
You
thing.
can go ahead. You can go ahead, Suzanne. But I have to tell you, Judy, the chapter on the blizzard was absolutely vivid.
Yeah.
I had a lot of letters from people that said, if I wasn't a vegetarian before, I sure as hell am now. The responses to the vividness of that chapter, I guess, were...
Suzanne told me that she cried after that chapter.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, where I cried was, what I really cried at was when you were taking your daughter.
Yeah.
Right.
And I could visualize the lights on the road and that sense of community, that even though you are widespread and you have miles between each other, there was just this visceral need to help.
Right. Well, and it's a thing you owe one another without being asked. And I read that on a million readings across country to urban audiences because they didn't have to be convinced of why I left. It's like, why the hell would you stay, is what the primary question was. And so that particular end of chapter came as close to describing what it was that kept us there. What makes it worth living out there, it has everything to do with belonging, with that sense of belonging that there are very few communities run deeper than that.
That's right. It wasn't the snow. It was the gumbo.
The gumbo.
That's right.
The gumbo.
It was that coming together.
You can shovel snow. Shovel gumbo.
But I think this segues very well, Diane, into your second question, if you'd like to ask her that as well.
Well, okay, actually, I wanted to sort of jump to the third for the moment and know if this book was therapeutic or cathartic for you.
Actually, I resisted writing about my background. I did not tell anyone in my writing programs. I was in journalism at the time. I did not tell anyone where I was from because I was embarrassed. I had never been outside the county. A dozen times by the time I left for good. And so it was difficult for me to answer, I guess, to these young people around me who had traveled the world, who had had all of this experience. And it took a couple of years of writing before I came to understand that what I knew was a microcosm of the world. What I knew was the interactive, the infinitesimal detail of an integrated community and the interactions of that community. And that when I projected that out, it really did match up with a lot of what I knew of the world. And so only then did I become comfortable writing about it. So, there's therapeutic and cathartic writing, but seldom is it literary, and seldom does it go beyond identifying feelings, which is valid. It's a valuable reason for writing. When I came to write Breaking Clean, I had moved beyond that to learning how to write, taking the personal story and elevating it to a level that connects with other people out there, taking it out from the individual to the universal, saying that my experience here is a microcosm of out there. This is what I did, what happened to me is similar to what happened to late baby boomers who learned feminism as a theme, and then tried to fit it into lives that didn't fit. We all had similar experiences regardless of where we were. I got letters from all over America from women born in the 50s who tried to get strong in the 60s and the difficulty of that when there was no place for it in our lives. When we were only less than a generation into birth control, for pity's sakes. It was difficult.
Well, thank you, Judy. A lot of the people on chat wondered how you were, or why you were so drawn to writing, and when you actually understood that writing was going to be important to you.
It came from my family identification as a storyteller.
Ah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I went to 8 grades at a one-room country school where the teacher was hard-pressed to keep me busy. I was the only person in my class, and she would have half a dozen classes, grades of kids going in one room. So she would set me to writing. I don't think I did have one male teacher, but he was not necessarily the best creative writer. I did a lot of writing for praise, and I learned how to rhyme. I still have my 9-year-old book of poetry that won the blue ribbon at the county fair. There was elements to writing that lasted longer than telling the good joke. And I read. You can't be a writer without being a good reader. You just can't. And I read everything. I had to be smacked out of the library at the school. We had a tiny shelf of books that they had deemed would be for later grades, and I had read my way almost all the way through them before I was caught out and made to stop.
One of the things that I really noted in the book, Judy, was your use of the colloquial language and the terms. In fact, several of the chatters, including you, Diane, did you not say that at one point you had your dictionary out looking up words?
I did.
And for me personally, I didn't have to do that because many of those were my childhood terms as well. But I loved your use of those terms, and I wondered if you could comment on that in terms of using that colloquial language so well and so effectively, and what did your editors think of it?
Well, I had the world's best editor, Robin Desser, was a senior editor for Knopf at the time that my book was going through that noble house, and she told me, I was surprised that I was getting away with as much sort of vernacular as I was, and I mentioned that to her, and she laughed, and she said, I learned a lesson early on in my editing career. She said I was editing a book by a Wisconsin writer, and of course she was a New York born and raised, and she said, I'm editing along, and this guy's driving a truck or a pickup or something. He pulls up in front of a house and goes raging into the house, and gunfights ensue and whatever. He comes running out, jumps in the cab, and takes off. And she said, in the margin I wrote, why would he take a taxi at this point? And it was her lesson to herself, because he was very kind to her, and kinder than he might have been. And she learned to listen first, to seek first to understand before she weighed in as an editor. It is the best lesson an editor can learn, is how to let the voice of the writer come through. Asking them, she did ask me to clarify the difference between a coulee and a cut bank and various things like that she couldn't even look up. But the rest of it, she just kind of trusted if she got what I was getting at, that the rest of the very smart reading public would as well. And I so admire her for that. It's like allowing a writer to be himself or herself, and exploring, especially in memoir. So valuable.
Did it bring it more alive to you, Diane, to have to look those words up and to learn this foreign country?
Well, it was a foreign. Well, in many ways, it presented the foreignness for me. The fact that I didn't know so many of these words, and it was wonderful. Actually, I was very happy. I have not had a book in a long time where I have had so many tabs on the edge of things I have to look up and find out. So I was very thrilled with this, to tell you the truth. The book was many levels for me. However, one of the things that we noticed, and some of the chatters said this, but I also noticed it, is that you really didn't address what the tipping point was for you that made you change the trajectory of your life, that made you take your children and leave your husband in the ranch. And could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I often, in real life, seldom does one find a tipping point. One finds a accumulation of events that at a certain point becomes unmanageable. And so a lot of the last couple of years of my life on the ranch I did not write about, at least in this book. So there were a lot of kind of health issues, and we were snowed in from December to April one year, and from January to April the next year. The sort of isolation, we had no phone, no mail, and the kind of isolation, the difference between isolation and solitude, shall I say, became clear to me. The tipping point, one of them was when the plows came down in the middle of February. Behind the plows, 70 miles from Malta, were a string of feed trucks and propane trucks and fuel trucks trying to get sustenance to the ranch. There was no idea that I was going to get out at any point, but I did have a pack of Minda feed, and they all slept on the floors and whatever around and headed out the next day. But I found myself going out and going through the ashtray of every truck trying to find cigarette butts. At that time, I was an unwilling non-smoker, thinking to myself, this isn't right. Something about this isn't ringing true. When I left the ranch, and I spent a year and a half in Malta, Montana before I moved to Missoula, there was one moment when I found myself standing in a commodity line. I was working 3 jobs and I could not keep my kids fed. I was standing in a commodity line with people I'd been taught I was better than. And there was a moment that I recognized that the strength that it had taken me to stay in that town for a year and a half, working these jobs and trying to do things right, that was the same strength that it was going to take me to leave. All I had to do was project it out instead of in. And it was an amazingly clear moment, and within 2 weeks I was out of Malta, in Missoula, and in journalism school.
In connection with that question, when I thought too, just like Diane said, that there was, not really clear in the book of what your motivations were. I mean, some of them were clear, but one of the things that occurred to me was that perhaps, that a lot of the people that you admired and liked, your husband and your relatives and so forth, you wanted to respect them and not be too explicit about, about some of the things that may have been personally dissatisfying to you.
Well, it comes down to it being my story. I did not want to, I left the ranch considering myself a failure. I had failed to live where I had been trained to excel, and I failed at it. And so I left the ranch with a certain very real sense of failure. To me, it wasn't this, yeehaw, got away sort of, all of the New York Times, reviews and so, she escaped the patriarchal whatever.
The Thelma and Louise.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, you know what happened to them. Just saying. It's not anything that dramatic. It's sad in the end. It's sad for the kids. They're parts of living on a ranch. I would have excelled at it if I'd have been the guy. If I would have got to, crack the whip and run the cow herd and run the breeding programs. And, my role was not especially exciting to me, I guess. I did the best I could with it for about 13 years, and that's about all we did. So,
Well, I'd like to refer to a part of your book that really speaks to how well you conveyed that strength of living out there. You really spoke to me on a lot of levels. And this one paragraph, when you were at Shaw's cabin.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought you just summed up that pioneer life that so well. And if you don't mind, can I read this one paragraph?
Sure.
If ranch wife was a job, I'd spent my entire life in training surely. But never had I felt more childlike and more alone than I had in these months of being a ranch wife. It seemed I had learned nothing. Then I thought about these past weeks would look in the old man's calendars. 1 page, 2 pages in a knee-high stack. Everything I knew seemed small in the measure of Shaw's years. His simple story of patience and perseverance told in dozens of eggs and gallons of milk. I felt no need to take the calendars with me. I left. I knew the numbers. All I needed was the faith in myself, faith in the seasons to come. I mean, it really says an enormous amount about the amount of strength and just acceptance.
Right.
That people who were able to make a life in your country had.
And what it came down to, I mean, especially the first generation of pioneers, I think that faith and that determination was all, powerful. When it came down to the third generation, which is where I came from, fear weighed in on almost every level. Fear of the outside, fear of a life we'd never been taught about, fear of things that we'd been trained to be afraid of, basically, is out there, everything out there. I had a high school education from a second-rate high school, and that was it. And so even I, who was reading Ms. Magazine, would understand how that would play out in the real world, how difficult it would be to, feed my children with that. And so by the third generation, there is the perseverance, because that's what we always gathered around us like quilts. But there's also this fear at the core of it that is a new generation thing that's like, I don't know what it's like out there. My grandparents came to that territory knowing all about lots of things, and they homesteaded with folks that had come from across the water and knew all kinds of ways of living and eating and talking and being. And those of us in third generation knew almost nothing of that outside world, and so that was a hampering element. Keeps us down on the farm when not much else will.
Yeah.
Fear does.
That's an interesting perspective, though, to understand that your grandparents' generation had a more worldly view because they came from outside.
Right. They had something to compare it with.
They had to have something to compare it with. I hadn't really thought in that terms, and that's a different kind of strength to then go out from that.
Right. But we always called that to us, just like, everyone who celebrates anything on the High Line celebrates the Homestead era. And that was the last true renaissance of people and ideas and, the excitement of the Homestead era. Where,
right.
It's hard to live up to.
Yeah.
But.
Diane, do you want to continue on your list? You have several more questions.
Yes, I was actually sitting here speaking and had it on mute. Judy, one of the things that many of us wondered is how this decision affected your children and how they feel now versus how they felt when you left. What was the price they paid for this?
Children always pay the price, and even after I moved to Missoula, I was working full-time and going to school full-time and being a full-time single parent, and the only group that could not fire me or flunk me were my children. And so, if it came down to somebody having to give way, they had to. By that same token, we kept an incredibly strong family unit. I read aloud to them until they were embarrassed by it. We were, we were in this adventure together, by the time they were in high school, they were grateful for the added experience because they had stepsisters in the Malta High School, and that would have been their option, would have been Malta High. And they saw that through their stepsister's eyes and said, OMG, we're glad we're here. I had 2 kids in the Missoula Symphony. I had, they had opportunities here for all kinds of things that they wouldn't have there, and they understood that part. As far as, I think kids in a divorce always suffer. They used to cry when they left my place to go to the ranch in the summer, and then they'd cry coming back in the fall. And, there's always transition. There's always the coming to grips with one household and the other. In the end, they would tell me that they felt that they got to live the best of both worlds. They got to come to work with me. I would put them to sanding floor ends. I was working construction at the time. They would go to their dad's, and whether I liked it or not, they'd be running farm machinery and raising bum calves and painting fences, and then they'd come back and we'd do it all again. So it could have been worse. I think they have learned they've made their peace with it, I guess.
Well, I actually think they've been strengthened by both.
I can tell you that they got every job they ever got in Missoula by listing their history as growing up on a ranch, because that is interpreted by people who hire kids as saying this kid learned how to work, and whether that was true or not, that got them a lot of tries.
Yes, indeed. I hire kids from ranches for the very same reason. One of my very best employees is a gal from Lewiston.
Yep.
Ranch gal. She works like
Lewistown.
That's
That's
right.
That's right. And
Lewistown.
her father is a good friend of a colleague of mine.
Yeah. We used to hire kids out of town. They would send their kids that got in trouble with whatever out to the ranch to spend the summer, and the kids hated coming out there. And oh my gosh, I brought up a lot of kids before I ever had one. It was interesting to see towny kids in the.
How did your kids react to the notoriety and the publicity and of the book itself? Not the living of the life, but the book.
The notoriety has a negative connotation, and so. I wasn't notorious, but out in the ranch country, it's true that the book did divide, it polarized the country that I came from. There were a segment of the population who read it, men and women, who said they liked it. They wrote me letters, or they would tell me in person that they liked it. There were others who never read it and did not believe that I had the right to write about what I wrote about. And so there's that big dynamic that went on in Phillips County for, a year and a half. I did not weigh in on that at all, but my kids were made party to it because they were spending summers at their dad's place. Their dad was one of the guys who didn't read it. But he got a lot of phone calls. He got People magazine calling him. He got New York Times calling him once they tracked down the surname, which I had not used out of respect for them. And so he felt it was an incredible invasion of privacy. And I had to agree with him. I had years to learn my craft. It took me 10 years to write this book. From the time it was first under contract, it took me 10 years to write this book. And I learned how to writing it. I had ultimate control over what I chose to write about and how I chose to portray it. And I had all of these writerly type answers about truth and fact and, promise and whatever. And my ex-husband had none of that. All he knew is that the New York goddamn Times was calling him on the phone. And so I had to respect his privacy as best I could, and my kids'. The article for the People magazine, they sent a photographer out and all of this stuff, and that article was killed because I refused to let them interview my kids. So, I mean, you've got to take it as you find it, and the notoriety part of it, the fame part of it, I always said I'd rather be rich than famous, and turns out I'm really not either one very much, so it is what it is. They love giving their friends, people they meet, whatever, my book. My daughter has made like a second career of selling my book, or not selling it, giving it away to her cohorts in the Bureau of Land Management. And so they've certainly made their peace with my book. And by the same token, I have not gone very far into any of their lives. I have tried not to, intrude on their privacy as well.
Well, that's sort of what I was referring to earlier when I said it seemed like you were being very cautious not to...
Mindful,
that's right.
Mindful of the damage that a writer can do. A memoir affects people. Nobody grows up in a bubble. Mm-hmm. And so our lives connect with other people. We've got people populating our stories, but being mindful of how those stories are told and never, ever writing for revenge. I tell my students that all the time. If you feel like you really want to get back at somebody, don't do it in writing. It makes you look vile, and oftentimes it doesn't serve the purpose. It doesn't really get back at them. It just shows you up.
One of the things we noticed, Judy, was what an important figure your mother was for you, and especially your mother as a horseman. And we assume that led to a lot of your love of horses. And the horse is a metaphor for strength in many ways in this book. Could you speak to that for a bit? Well,
metaphors are something I didn't intentionally write into the book, so when they're discovered, I always just smile and nod. It's hard to...
Spoken like an excellent writer.
Yeah, where to put that. It was where my mother's brightest star shone, was in her love for horses, and it's how she identified herself, was through her horsemanship. She's 91 now, and can't ride anymore. So, but one of her most telling moments in the last 10 years has been when she called and said that she sold her last horse. And it was the end of an era of sorts. It was the end of her being able to identify herself by her horses. I had to give up. I always tell everyone that when I moved to Missoula, I gave up high-maintenance animals. No dogs, no horses, no men. And, that's a joke, of course, kind of, but also not.
Oh, I understand.
I had to turn loose of horses because I simply was not in a financial position to... I couldn't hire a horse. I couldn't afford to keep a dog. I couldn't pay insurance on my car. So I had to just turn loose of a lot of things. And I've done so pretty diligently over the years, just turning loose of those things that I know that were part of my old life that are not possible in this new one.
I have to say that Judy's and my life has crossed several times without us knowing each other. For one thing, she came into our home this evening and noticed the floors. And she said, "When did you put your floors in?" And she worked for the company who did put our floors in, and she remembered it going in.
I recognize the white oak.
It's underneath the acoustically designed carpeting.
Exactly.
That's right.
Protecting the floors, as it should.
And then the other thing is you have brought your grandchild out. You brought your grandchild out for some horse experiences.
I did. I told her to dream when she was 3 years old.
So that was before we became acquainted on this level. And so the horses have brought us together in the past, for sure. You know, one of the things, I read this book before when it first came out. And the first time I read it for the story. And this is the wonderful thing about books, is you get to reread them. And you get to read them on different levels and find different things.
Yes.
And at this time, I was just so taken by your use of language. And I asked myself, how much work did this take? Because you were very precise. Your sentences were laden with meaning. And you painted such vivid pictures. And I was just wondering if you could tell us something about the craft of doing that. It just seemed like it would be intimidating to me if I had written a book that is this good. I mean, does it intimidate you?
Well, certainly. I was in college as a journalism student, and that, of course, gives compression. You learn how to compress. You learn various ways of writing. You learn to write. I could never learn to write fast. I'm very slow. I'm an extruder. I am a pasta machine of writers. And I tend to write and erase and write and erase, and if I get a page and a half in a day, that's a good day for me. But what happens is that it becomes chiseled in stone, and so you get this incredibly compressed narrative that is honed as it goes, and then when you start in working your way to where you left your tools in the tunnel, you revise it yet again, and you hone and hone and hone. And I also was studying poetry, which is all about rhythm, pacing, language, the sounds of words. And so all of that came together in the way I learned to write, which is what I tell my students now, it's CPR. When you have a story that doesn't have a heartbeat, you need to give it CPR, which is compression, pacing, and rhythm. Those three things of tightening everything down is a form of expression that is poetic, but it's narrative. It's a story told in carefully selected language. It's a joy to write that way. I mean, the finding the exact right word to express the precise, to have it ring off the consonants and assonants and have it all come together, is to write a sentence that has you up doing the little jig and the little dance before you sit down and write some more. It's a delight to do it.
That's interesting to me, because even though I'm not a creative writer and I've never studied it, I have heard that there are various philosophies of teaching it, including one, just get it all out there, a massive, just lay it all out there and then go back and revise and revise.
Some people do it that way.
Yeah.
I've never been a very traditional writer. It was like being discovered in a malt shop. I had an agent who recognized a piece that I had printed in Northern Lights and flew to Missoula to meet me, and I resisted her until she finally said, I'm going to New York, send me everything you've ever written, which was all of 20 pages, seriously, 20 pages. So I did, and she came back with 3 offers. That doesn't happen, that just doesn't happen. One of them was the very first essay of the book. And the other one, which was the other one? The forest essay, the essay of the young Native American kid. I'd written that for a Native American studies literature class. So these are not traditional ways of writing, and the way I write is not the way most people write. I can remember listening to Ed Hoagland when he came, on a visiting adventure to the University of Montana when I was a undergraduate, and I came to listen to him, and he had a speech issue. He spoke slowly, but he also he told the group there that that his way of producing a lot was not to write this flood of information that you then had to find the cup of gravy in the cesspool, but to keep several different projects going. And so he would write and hone and craft and forge a half a page and burn out on one piece, and then he'd go to another. And he kept several pieces in the air at the same time. That became my sort of motif, I guess, because I was so thrilled to hear that he wrote similarly to me. I would have never made it as a journalist, seriously. I did some work at the Missoulian as a grad student, and I can remember all of them hovering over my shoulders as the deadline neared. And I just, not for me. Okay.
You mentioned Forrest, so I have to go to the I had a dart on one of your use of language. I think is just outstanding, and you're talking about Forrest and Mrs. Norby, and I just love the way this last sentence went. Mrs. Norby persisted like a trainer with a jump-shy colt, putting him through his paces, round the cards faster and faster. I could see a colt going around and around, Pen. Gaining momentum, and then the book would appear, and Forrest would break his feet and skid to a stop. That is so evocative and of a jump shy colt.
Not such a great trainer. Those two things together.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that was beautiful, I thought.
I know one of the questions that you had, Diane, was the price I paid with my family for being so honest. And,
yes,
honestly, my sister, Margaret, when she first read the book, I gave the book to all of my siblings and my parents when it was in galley, which, the galley proofs, they weren't going to get to weigh in on what I said, but they're going to get at least a front, room to run. They'll get
right of first refusal.
Exactly. Yeah, they can form their arguments in their minds as the thing's coming out. But my sister Margaret called and she said, "Boy, you sure pulled some punches in this one." She understood what I could have said in times that I didn't, and so primarily my family, I think, was kind of relieved that I didn't choose to expose them. I didn't want to make my book about them. I wanted to make it about, I entered it thematically. Every chapter in my book is a separate essay that I'm looking at a particular theme. What's it like to be a raised girl in cowboy country? What's it like to come from a town or from a country life to a town at age 13 and learn how to survive? What's it like? This different thematic elements, which is probably why I couldn't quite get myself off the ranch by the end of the book. People ask me why I ended it when I did, and it's like, honestly, it had been 10 years, and they said 300 and some odd pages, and it was 300 and some odd pages, and I just hit the final period and sent it off. It was, I can remember printing it out and putting it in one of my son's size 13 shoe boxes and sending it off to New York thinking, thank God I never have to read that thing again. And as it turns out, I have read it pretty much since. But the price I paid with my family is minimal. I have been incredibly fortunate. They were very generous, and if they disagreed, they chose not to air it publicly. And so I tell everyone my father only read 2 books in his life. One I left there one time when I was up doing laundry from my ranch to theirs, and it was a book called, it was about Charlie Manson, the Manson murders. Yeah.
Oh, my.
Yeah, well, it confirmed everything he knew about California, about hippies, about, it actually put paid to everything he understood about the outside world. And the second one was mine, and I don't know which one scared him more, in that it just seemed out of his control. But my mother looked at him and said, Clarence, it's a book, it's not a gall dang alligator, it's not going to bite your leg off. Okay, so on we went. My mother collected every copy. She came up to Missoula. She just had both of her knees replaced. My parents have 4 plastic knees among them. She came up and we went to Costco, where they were selling my $24.95 book, the hardback, for $14.95. And she cashed in her Social Security check and she bought every single copy. And the gal, as we're running him, over the scanner, this must be a great book, she said. Whatever. So we took him back to my old condo, and my mother, who's got the fingers of her right hand cut off from the mower, peeled the Costco stickers off him and handed them over to me, and I signed them all. She took them back to Malta. In Malta, the one place that sold books was the Valley Drug Store, and they had refused to carry my book because they didn't want to, quote, get involved, the Air Bunnies, get involved with the controversy, because the owner of the Valley Drug used to like to hunt on my ex-husband's ranch, so I'm not going to go there. So she was angry about that. She wanted, it was my kid's book. So she took all of those copies out, and she sold them out of the back door of her house for $24.95. $10 profit on every book. Go team. And actually, at last count, she had sold more than 300 copies of my book out of her back door, which puts her, as far as individual bookstores, like at number 3 in the nation for book sales. Like, go team. Anyway.
Where did the title come from, Judy?
The title came from the very first essay, which I wrote for a midterm assignment to Bill Beavis's Montana Writers class. He had given us this assignment to write our Montana experience in 5 pages or less, and I was studying poetry, and so I did these kind of compressed, poetic, sort of image-ridden bits that kind of tried to leapfrog me out of town and couldn't quite get there. Anyway, I was writing it on a typewriter. Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And long about midway through the night, I'd gotten to the end of 5 pages, and so I had to retype it. And I had written Clean Break as the title of this, moving from eastern Montana to western Montana, Clean Break. And at that time of night, with my kids sleeping around me and about 2 hours to daylight, I thought, it's not a clean break, I'm still breaking clean. So I wrote Breaking Clean out of sheer exhaustion on the top of it. My editors liked it. They thought it was evocative without being, too telly. They would have adored getting the word Montana in there somewhere, but we won out, so.
Well, Diane, on one of our recent chats, I remember we all asked to sum up what the book was about. And I remember I chimed in and said, for me it was, if I had to sum it up, it was that the country of the birth always owns you at some level. And I was wondering if you could sum up what the book is from your perspective.
Well, I liked your perspective a lot, and I have to tell you, Suzanne, I've been thinking about it ever since we've had the chat, because it was obviously something that truly resonated with me. However, I do also think that the name Breaking Clean is a very good summary of the main threads in this book. It is the pulling together of all of those threads of your life and being able to take them in a different direction and break clean from where you went, but use those threads to form your new life, which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, actually, I'm with you. I do remember that trying to find elements of my old life that spoke to my new life was an exercise in heartbreak. I loved calving. I loved the spring. None of that equated into anything. There's no calving on 4th Street, And even trying to find a piece of ground that would raise a tomato was difficult. So I knew how to do so many things. I had butchered animals. I had canned and frozen. I had done all of these things that would make me a good survivalist. Had absolutely nothing to do with my current life. And so for me, the saddest part about the book, I guess the breaking clean part, is leaving behind kind of a legacy of my grandmothers and my mother and me. The people whose life on the ranch kind of culminated in me, and then I left. And I could say it's the strength that they showed through all of that also was distilled into me. But ultimately, there's just a lot of that I had to step away from. I think one of the biggest sadnesses for me has been a lot of ranch women who will find my book to be a challenge to their way of life. In other words, I left the way of life that they still revere, and so they'll see it as a judgment on them somehow, that they must be stupid if they stayed there somehow. I don't know. I can't tell you. But I've been accosted at readings by ranch women who will very stoically stand in the back like this, waiting for the reading to end, and then ask me questions like, how does it feel to make money on the heartbreak of other people?
Oh, dear.
Oh, yeah. It's like when I make money, I'll tell you. I don't know. So far, it's a break-even deal. So, but, there's that. I hate to lose my old life, too. I want it all. I want both, so.
Well, I thought your very last paragraph was, that's what made me sum it up the way I did. Mm. And would you read it for us? I just really loved this last paragraph.
The house. I took my kids to see my house. Your
stone house?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Made out of teepee stone.
Stones anyway, and, for them it's like something they read about that then suddenly came real.
Yeah.
Oh my golly, I can see just like she said.
Yeah.
I left my house as I found it, settling into the sod a year at a time. The prairie will reclaim its squared corners and straight walls as it has gradually, patiently taken back the teepee rings left centuries before. Driving the narrow, familiar road back to my parents' ranch, I felt a sense of peace, imagining my house hundreds, thousands of years from now, suspended far below the surface of the short grass plains, 5 stone rooms that hold a part of me still. That was the last part of the book when I sent it in. Robin Desser said, you need a coda, you need an end chapter. You can't just quit at the branding corral. You've got to at least tell us you got off the ranch. And so that was the impetus of the summary last chapter, written in one sitting.
But I think, again, for me, I've seen teepee rings on the front, and it does. Those stones are sunken in, and there is a permanence about that. And I think that's where, again, you really drew your stones will become those stones. It was very evocative.
They already have, actually. It's about halfway up on the rocks now.
Yeah.
The turf has grown up around them.
Around them. They become part of it.
Teepee stones are quite large. And so now, 100 years into it or more, it looks like the collected bald spots of a dozen men this way and a dozen that way, in that the turf has grown up and just shows the little round, almost perfectly round as the grass grows. It's very sort of even, and the little round tops of all of these rocks. It's how you can kind of tell teepee rings, because they were all on top of the ground at the same time, and so they all kind of are covered at the same level.
And they have
I'll have to say, Judy, that last paragraph sounds suspiciously like a metaphor.
Bummer. Well, who'd have thought?
Yeah. Beautifully written.
I'm not against them. I'm not against them.
Judy, thank you so much for sharing with us, both in terms of having written the book, which was wonderful to read twice, and for coming and sharing with us online here. We've really enjoyed it. Everybody has.
It's my pleasure.
And I'm really excited to take what we have learned and move on to the next book. One of the questions that I had asked Judy, but when she came in today, was how much of an influence was Mary Clearman Blue to you? Would you address that a little bit?
Mary was the person that she was the pioneer of Montana women writing memoir. And she's of the old school. I can remember her. I took workshops from her. Write what you write, call it what it is one of them. She wrote essays in a more traditional format, but they were about growing up. One of the essays you'll read in this book is called The Unwanted Child, and it is one of the most anthologized essays that you will ever find written about Montana life. And it bridges this idea of growing up on a ranch to getting off it. She got off her ranch when she was 18 by going to school, but at what cost? Read this book. It's just amazing.
It's All But the Waltz by Mary Clearman Blue, and we will be having 2 online sessions again with Diane, and those will be on Wednesday, January 14th, so that's next Wednesday, I believe. Not this coming Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. And then again on Wednesday, January 28th, both at 6 p.m. Montana time. And then Mary Clearman Blue has agreed to participate on February 15th in our next online session. She will not be here in person. She lives in Idaho. And we will have her on the phone or Skype. We're going to experiment a little bit to see how that goes. We hope to bring her in to our conversation. And we will do that on February 15th at 5 p.m. here again at Dunrovin. And thank you all. Thank you, Diane. It was wonderful working with you. And I know you've already started the book, as have I. And I look forward to
and I
discussion.
ran into my gumbo roads again.
Some things are just there. It's like the subway.
See, all of those tabs that I put on Judy's book, it's going to pay off in reading this book.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Wonderful.
The ones that come after.
Yeah. Wonderful, Diane. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Judy.
Oh, thank you.
It was a wonderful book and a great, enjoyable experience.
Great experience for me as well. Thank you.